What's going on, guys? Larry here, coming to you live from my office, which is really my living room. Me and my wife kind of switch places. Working from home a little bit longer, until about June. So trying to put out content that will help people with their work training, working out, all of that, because we've all been in that situation where we got questions about things and we don't necessarily know the answer to them. So, which is fine. But there's a subject today that I wanted to talk about, and I kind of espoused about it on my Instagram, and it was from a book by the name of The New High Intensity Training by Dr. Ellington Darden. So there's some concepts in there that I think a lot of people need to be reminded of, and why it's so important, and why high intensity training, or progressive overload rather, why progressive overload really isn't that new of a concept. We dress it up very fancy and put a big bow on top, but progressive overload can mean many things. But I think if we get the understanding of some of these concepts that I'm about to talk about, then we can look at progressive overload in more of a holistic manner rather than just the singularity of it sometimes, which is just increase the load and increase the repetitions every other workout. Obviously, that's a very, very, very important part of progressive overload, but there's some other things that need to take place and need to happen for progressive overload to be a effective training tool. So we're going to get into some of those today, and all of these concepts come from a book by the name, like I said, The New High Intensity Training by Dr. Ellington Darden. It's pretty cheap on Amazon, so if you can pick it up, pick it up. I think it's a great addition to any bodybuilder's library, whether or not you follow that type of training or any variation of that training, but just some of the cool stories that are in there as well. So we're going to jump right into it. All right, the first subject is intensity. So we throw intensity around as part of a blanket statement, right? This exercise was intense. That set was intense. But when we talk about intensity, what do we really mean? You got a couple of ways that you can measure intensity. You can use the reps and reserve method, is something I kind of use now. You can use the rate of perceived exertion method, which is something I have vast experience with and have used quite extensively for the past couple of years. Or you could do the percentage of your 1 rep max, which is more geared toward powerlifting than it is hypertrophy, although it does have some benefits in a hypertrophy sense, right? So intensity is subjective. It's not a one size fits all category. It's not a one size fits all thing that you can just apply to everybody. A Guy Sister Nino intense set is probably far beyond an intense set that I do. So it runs the gamut, but what's really important is that when people say intensity, we're just saying work really, 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 really hard during your work sets, and use your warm-up sets to prime you to have a maximum high output in those intense sets when you do them. So that's what we mean by intensity. All right, the next subject on this list is progression. So progression's funny because there's many ways to progress, but for the basis of this conversation, we're going to focus on a couple of specific parts of progression. Load, obviously the most common one, volume, and then we're going to fall into another realm of progression, which is frequency, which in and of itself is its own category. So with progression, obviously load being the most common part of progression, is also the most misused, right? So when we think of when we say use load, obviously we mean using heavy weights, but we also mean using heavy weight in perfect form, right? So what's perfect form? That's going to be talked about when we get to form, which is actually next. But when we use heavy load, we want to make sure that we're hitting the target muscle. We're not really bringing in any extra body movement to try to hoist weight up or anything like that. Now, as far as progression via volume, that's something that is going to have to be accumulated slowly over the course of a training cycle, right? You get in shape to train, you don't train to get in shape. So if you're out of shape and you've never had a high intensity or an intense workout program, then it's probably best that you start out slow with some type of total body movement a couple of times a week, combined with a little bit of cardio to kind of get you in shape for the rigors of what's to come. But if you're already advanced, then obviously a step ladder of your volume accumulating over weeks, months, years is something that's very important and that you have to account for every so often. So volume is extraordinarily important in muscle growth. No, it's not the main driver of muscle growth, but it is a driver of muscle growth. I wholeheartedly believe the physiques that you see that are super round yet dense, hard, and full have done a considerable amount of volume training. So you may want to keep that in mind when you are trying to go the low volume route. This is just something that I have always thought about. Another way to manage progression kind of bleeds into another subject, frequency. So we're gonna leave that alone, but it does count in your progression plan. So slowly adding weight, slowly adding volume is a very good way to increase, is progression. It's not a good way to increase, it is progression. So moving on, we have form. Okay, so like I said, for progression, your form should be able to focus on the muscle without much of an influence from others, meaning you're not herking and jerking the weight or whatever, right? So here's the thing that you need to understand about form, and this is the best way to describe it. Your first rep and your last rep should be identical, if not close to identical, depending upon the exercise. I'm gonna put that out there. You should not be able to tell which, if someone was looking at you, unless they saw you start and end, they wouldn't know which rep was which, right? So you need to keep your form standardized for a particular exercise the same all the way across the board. That's form. When your first and your last rep look exactly the same, right? And then to help out with your form, you should probably start recording yourself and sending it to people who may be a little bit more experienced than you, who may have been in the trenches longer than you. I still do the same thing today, and I've had a lot of time under a bar. So form is very, very special to high intensity training and progressive overload as well, and shouldn't be overlooked. If I'm seeing any expert guys comment on this video, they're probably clapping that I'm emphasizing form, because it's such a misused and abused subject within progressive overload that people forget that it should be going heavy but with perfect form. Another concept that you need to think about is duration of your workout. Sometimes we have a tendency to get sidetracked, we start to talk, we start to play on our phones. That increases the duration of the workout. So is there an optimal time that you need to be in and out of the gym? I like an hour and a half. Anything more, you probably need to pick up the pace a little bit. And I'm speaking to myself, because sometimes my sessions can get a bit lengthy, but that all depends upon the amount of volume that you're doing inside of your workout, right? So if you're training chest and delts, those are two relatively decent body parts that can handle a lot of weight. So if you're doing max weight on two body parts, then that could probably take a while to warm up to actually perform, so the duration of your workout is something that you want to keep manageable. Nothing too crazy. I'd say at the most 2 hours is enough. That's at the most. All right. So try not to go over that amount. Or dear God, please. Frequency. Let's talk about frequency for a minute. So this goes into volume progressions, right? So the more frequent you can work a body part, the more stimulus chances you get for it to grow, right? There's an old saying that I got back when I was in powerlifting, and it kind of works for bodybuilding. If you want to look like you lift a lot of weights, if you want to look like you lift a lot of weight, lift a lot of weights, right? So frequency becomes very important, but you have to keep in mind your recovery. If you're not recovering from high frequency workouts, then they're basically not going to do anything for you except burn you out some more. So at the most, I've trained body parts 3 times a week. That was a little bit too much for me in retrospect. However, twice a week leg training kind of suits me for a little bit, but now I've dropped the frequency back to just training body parts 1 time per week, old school. Training a body part twice per week can help. 1 heavy and 1 moderately heavy, right? And you want to have those spaced out apart at least 48, 72 hours. So that's not scientific or anything like that. That's just something that I'm thinking of, that you need to separate your body parts that you're training frequently pretty far out. So frequency is very, very, very important for progressive overload. I know a lot of people train body parts 3 times a week as part of their progressive overload plan. Again, I'm not a fan of it, but I can't knock what they're doing. Your volume has to be low if you're doing high frequency, right? And I mean high frequency 3 times a week. If you're doing 2 times a week, then you can get away with a little bit higher volume. A good guide that I think can guide everybody in regards to volume markers is the Renaissance periodization volume markers for muscle growth. I'm going to put that link in the description, and I want you all to go there and try to follow along with what they're saying and see if that's something that you can work into your overall training plan. Last but certainly not least, order. Order of your exercises. Order. Order of your exercise is very important in order to avoid redundancies in your training. So would you do 2 types of squat inside of your workout? Or would you do leg press, then a squat, or a squat variation, and then leg extension, squat variation? Now, you could very well do 2 types of squats in your workouts. I'm not here to judge you or anything like that, and I've even done it sometimes, but I try to not have 2 squatting movements within the same workout, because it just, for me, is a little bit redundant. So find a way to limit redundancies and keep the order of your exercises clean, right? So really, that's all I have to say on order. That's what it's such a nuanced concept, and we can go back and forth on it all day, but just try to avoid redundancies in your training program. Well, guys, that wraps up my little work, half sleep TED talk that I put you guys through. If you got any good information out of this, please let me know. Like and subscribe to my YouTube page. I hope to be doing this a little bit more often. I haven't done a day in the life because my day in the life is this and family, so it's pretty boring. I don't run a gym or any, type of cool shit like that. I'm just a working everyday man who loves bodybuilding, loves lifting weights. So keep an eye out on this page. I'm gonna eventually do some cool stuff, but until then, just sometimes me ranting on subjects and me training. So back day tomorrow, and we're gonna work really, really hard. So again, thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.